Thank you. So good morning again, Brian Salkowski, and I was actually favorably surprised to see that kind of energy. I figured after Second City last night we might have a little bit more sedate crowd. Just a quick clarification for everyone. Bartek is proud to be the sponsor of the Warden Track. Impellam Group is the parent company of Bartek. I thought in honor of Second City last night, I might just kick us off this morning, especially since we're the first thing of the day, with a little HR humor. So save your groans till the end, please. So a gentleman passes away and is sent to the pearly gates where he meets St. Peter. And at that point, he's surprised when he's asked the question, would you prefer to join me in heaven or go to hell? And needless to say, the gentleman was surprised and said, I didn't know there was a choice. He said, you have a day to experience each, at which point your decision is final. So he goes into heaven, and needless to say, it's heavenly. There's fluffy clouds, angels flying by with harps. No surprise, and it's wonderful. A day later, he's whisked away to hell, and there he's shocked by what he sees. Instead of misery, there's music playing, there's drinking, there's band going in the background, and he's absolutely stunned. Time passes quickly, and he's again in front of St. Peter, who says, have you made your choice? And he said, I can't believe this, but St. Peter, I choose hell. And in a moment, flash, he's down at the gates of hell, but the scene is quite different. Instead of music and revelry, there's smoke and fire and brimstone and chains and whips. And he leans over and he finds Satan and says, what happened? And Satan kind of chuckles, oh, you mean yesterday? Yes, yesterday. What happened to all the music? Oh, yesterday you were a recruit. Today, you're staff. All right. Thanks for indulging me. So I thought I'd start off with hopefully an easy question here. But for the folks in the room, what's your sense? Getting easier or harder to find talent in the marketplace? Show of hands if you think it's getting harder. Okay, that is almost a consensus. And intellectually, no real surprise here. This is a recent Bullhorn survey, and by a 48-point margin, the consensus is it's getting harder out there. So I'll take a couple moments to talk about why. I think most of us are aware of these as we talk and have seen these stats many times, but a lot of it's a numbers game. It's numbers driven by demographics, and we have a skills shortage. This is well publicized, in particular with the STEM skills, but that is expected, that gap for collegiate, postgraduate professionals is expected to widen upwards of 40 million over the next 3 to 4 years. In addition, our population is aging. So we don't have the skills match, but we also have less of us in the workforce. And lastly, we're not replacing ourselves as fast as we used to. So all of this is driving changes that are increasing the difficulty of finding all skills within the marketplace, but in particular those science, technology, engineering, and math. Add to this, there's a new norm for employees. Also, we've talked about this, and there was time spent yesterday speaking about the millennials, but this statistic is pretty stark as you look at it. 37% of the U.S. workforce prefers an alternate way of working to traditional full-time employment. That number has grown. We really saw this launch following the financial crisis, where many individuals, first out of necessity, but then out of preference, took to independent contracting or freelancing as a way of working. And then as we fast forward to the millennials, it wasn't a necessity here. This is something that they've known, and they're quite comfortable with the idea of gigging or freelancing. 82% see it as freelancing as a viable career path. So that's the employee side. Now we go to the employer side, and I know some of you, based on the stats I saw yesterday for the talent acquisition leaders, may disagree with this statement, but it is true, and I'll explain why. I know the number was, I think, 70,000 hires for the talent acquisition leaders over the last couple of years, but the reality is American companies have never before tried so hard to employ so few people. And the question that's constantly asked is, can I outsource it? If I can't outsource it, can I automate it? Actually, I got that backwards. Can I automate it? If I can't automate it, can I outsource it? If I can't outsource it, can I do it on a project basis with a freelancer or independent contractor? And very often, the idea of hiring an employee is the last resort, and it's only the most essential employees. There's an article that came out, I want to say about 2 months ago, that was really interesting. If you haven't seen it, it's on the Wall Street Journal website. It's called The End of Employees. I highly recommend it. And when we talk about this, trying so hard not to hire employees, there's a couple of statistics that I'm borrowing from that article that I think are really informative. Revenue per employee has skyrocketed since 2003. Why? Are the companies that much more profitable? Well, there's a profitability part of the equation, but the biggest part is that there's less employees. So since 2003, 22% increase in revenue per employee. And you can take a look at companies like Virgin America. Virgin America outsources maintenance, outsources catering, outsources baggage handling. If it's not customer facing, it's not done by employees. A company like Google, which is perennially amongst the top places to work, has roughly even numbers of employees to external workers, temps, vendors, consultants, 70,000 of them. So the new norm for employees or employers is we're trying to do more with less full-time staff. This stat is also from that article, and I found it fascinating. We'll have to wait and see whether or not the prediction comes true. But Accenture, a firm I'm sure we're all familiar with, predicted that within 10 years, you're going to have at least one Fortune 2000 company that has outsourced all functions, save the C-suite or executive ranks. So there is a confluence of factors that we see with us today, right? We see that employers are looking to do more with less full-time staff. We're seeing employees become, one, less available because of demographic changes, and those that are very adaptive and open to alternative ways of working. So, quick question for the audience. When we talk about the contingent workforce, so that I would define broadly as someone who goes to work at a place that the place of work, it's not their employer. So these can be temps, these can be outsourced workers with outsourced services, they can be consultancies doing work on a statement of work, all of the above. Anyone want to throw out a number where they believe that percentage is today? I know it's early, but someone. 30%? The number is up to 40%. It's a little bit of a difficult number to get to, but this number has close to doubled over the last 10 years. And what's interesting about it is if you take a look at the most narrow definition, temporary workers provided by an agency, that only counts for about 2% of the total workforce. So what's filling in the other gap, that balance? Well, it's freelancers, independent contractors, which is certainly a rising share, and it's workers with contract services firms that are going to work either at one place of business or multiple places of business with their service provider employer. So next question is, if it's close to 40% today, where's it going to be 10 years from now? Anyone? Guess is about 50%. Obviously, we're making an estimate here, and time will prove whether or not it's true. But we could be looking at a scenario in the not too distant future when, with large corporations and organizations, where nearly half of the workforce that actually gets work done, right, that's on site, in the systems, interfacing with customers and employees, not your own employees. So the question is, why do we care? And before we go on to that, I almost skipped a slide here. We do need to talk about technology, innovations, and disruptions. This is certainly important when we think about this. And going back to that statement, can I automate it? Can I outsource it? Can I send it to an independent contractor? Well, automate it is a big part of it. And we've heard a fair number of comments on this. I thought the session closed the day yesterday, iTalent, was really, really informative. But when we talk about a confluence of factors, part of this is certainly technology. When we look at what can be automated, what can be done through machine learning, and the connectivity of us to our devices, to our organizations, and to their systems. So technology is driving rapid change. I'm stating the obvious here. You take that with demographic changes, you take that with changes in attitudes both with employers and employees, and we have a perfect storm in terms of disruption within the marketplace. So I'm going to move to top challenges for workforce management. And I'll freely confess that when I first looked at this data, I was a little bit surprised to see that HR business partners identified need to improve, enhance compliance as the top challenge right now, along with visibility. And although that number surprised at first, I would actually argue that this is a little bit of a backward-looking metric or statistic. And the reason I say that is I think as we see more technology automate, take items that have been, when we think about talent acquisition, and I hope I don't offend here, but historically, anecdotally, it's been a very transactional-oriented process, right? So submit resumes, skill screening, onboarding, et cetera, very transactional, in which case compliance is elevated, top and foremost. But as the opportunity manifests to become more strategic about a total workforce or a blended workforce, I think you'll see these priorities shift. It doesn't mean that compliance doesn't have a priority anymore, but it's not leading the top of the list. And instead, you're going to see the need to improve talent strategies move quickly to number one, and whether by proactivity or just necessity, that last one, need to manage the many sources of talent or labor. And this goes to where do folks go to gig? If they're in freelancing, how do I access those individuals? When we think about technology and the impact that can have in terms of putting worker and employer together, these are all different factors, and you're going to see these, my prediction, you're going to see these shift pretty dramatically over the coming years. So how do we respond? I love this cartoon. All in favor of taking action, please submit a report. Definition of proactivity. But the reason that we ask this question here is that ultimately it's great to talk about this. Hey, Brian, those are interesting statistics, but if we're just sharing those statistics, there's no real benefit from it. It's ultimately about action and how do we respond. And so with that, I'd like to pivot. And as was shared in the introduction, Bartek is a managed service provider. We help organizations solve and create contingent workforce solutions. And when we talk about that, it's not just an external provider, it could be an internal program team that supports the organization's contingent workforce solutions. But we've seen a pronounced difference over the last 5 to 10 years in terms of what is next generation and how a program team and an overarching workforce strategy can contribute to organizational issues. So if I went back in time, what was considered strategic then is very transactional today. It was hyper-focused on the contingent or temporary, the narrowest definition is in the temporary workforce. And as just shared, that's 2% of the total. Whereas today, increasingly, every single customer that I talk to, new, prospective, or existing, wants an assessment of what our blended workforce is. So that 60-40 mix or whatever it may be within your organization. We see some industries, oil and gas is a classic example where very often, if not in the total organization, but at least certain sectors in terms of midstream projects, et cetera, where contingents or external workers can outnumber internals 2 to 1. So that blended workforce point of view. HR and procurement silos. This one may not surprise this audience at all, but we often saw procurement driving with a hyper focus on cost, HR at arm's length. But now we're seeing an increasing engagement with HR executives such as yourself, understanding that contingents are part of the total talent ecosystem and very important to the long-term strategy of the business. So it's a collaborative partnership with HR taking the front seat at the table and the lead role, knowing that this is going to feed and support their long game in terms of talent, not just the talent strategies today. So moving from administrative tactical transitions to a total talent point of view to better understand how work gets done in our organization, how it contributes to the objectives of the company and to their broader purpose and ways of getting work done. So I want to take a moment to talk about workforce modeling, and this is where I think it gets really interesting. So this has been talking concept, but now we move into workforce modeling. You talk about organizational objectives. Ultimately, those are defined by hiring managers who have to support and get work done in line with those organizational objectives. And they're going to define requirements. And what we see increasingly is that internal or external program team sitting at the intersection of the decision point. So we have work that needs to get done. What is the right way to do it? Is it to hire internally? Perhaps. Is it to bring in a temporary or agency worker? Maybe. Is it an independent contractor? Should we outsource it? It's not about right or wrong, one being good, the other being bad. That's not the case at all. Instead, it's about understanding the underlying critical details that inform a quality strategic decision. So what am I referring to when I say that? Well, and sorry, I'm not great at clicking along here. So what am I referring to? There's different strategies, right? But is this a recurring need or is it one-off? Does this work involve access or the creation of substantial intellectual property that's important to the organization and needs to be safeguarded? We're going to be managing or supervising our employees. These are all factors that inform quality decision making. Say, you know what? Maybe it should be an employee. This is an ongoing need. They will be accessing IP. There's an extreme need for confidentiality and discretion. That's the recommendation. Other ones, it's project. It's spot in time. We need a deliverable. We need accountability for a milestone. So by sitting at the intersection of this and helping to inform, not just fill a requirement, right? Open posting, place a body into it, but to understand how it contributes to the organization, what the critical factors are underneath, and in turn, to make recommendations that support the business, support the hiring manager, and demonstrate an effective understanding of the requirements. So I like this next slide. We start to talk about adaptive strategies. Where do we see some of these in action? And when we talk about a blended workforce. So the first one, and we're seeing this proliferate today, still relatively new, but what we term co-sourcing arrangements. So thinking about the fact that as talent acquisition leaders, many of you are, you're sourcing for requirements within your teams. You also have external providers, whichever the type they are, that are sourcing for similar roles. Is there opportunity for sharing of not only that information, but candidates between those, what has been historically completely separate labor pools, to create win-win solutions across the organization, expand the access to talent, enhance the employment brand? Hey, I don't have an internal need for you at this point in time, but our partner, our supplier, has a project work that, one, could give you exposure to the organization, enhance and restore our talent brand, and put them in line, in queue, for the next opportunity that comes up. There's lots of opportunities, and this is developing. It takes a broader view and close collaboration with your partners and suppliers. Talent engagement programs that reduce red tape and increase loyalty. I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but obviously to the extent that we can remove administrative burden and really focus on engaging a long-term and loyal associate for the organization. Next is integrated technology. This has probably been beat to death, but you look at all those names there: VMS, HRIS, ATS, online platforms, separate onboarding or hiring compliance systems, et cetera, all sitting in silos. Very hard to have a view of a blended and total workforce if it's all sitting in different buckets. So through both integrations as well as enhanced capability R&D, we're seeing a confluence of these so that within a single system or through pushes, pulls between systems, that total view can take place. The next one is predictive analytics, and I'd like to talk a little bit about this one because I think there's a real opportunity here, but it's not with the buzzwords. The opportunity is overlooked. Big data has obviously been a big thing for some time now. Everyone's talking about it, but you see the bullet: predictive analytics, informed demand forecasting, and retention. It's a bit deeper than that, and we look at the amount of data that's available, and something as simple as retention, which could be defined as the inverse of negative attrition. Yes, that's helpful, but based on the data that we have and looking at external workforce now, we can actually take a look at things like wage elasticity. We can use mathematical approaches like a survival or hazard function to pinpoint the areas where attrition risk is most acute. So we're not just identifying our number and that there's a need to improve retention, but we're also identifying what the risk points are in someone's life cycle supporting the organization so that we can be proactive and have strategies to mitigate that before the attrition or before the retention risk actually manifests. So I'd like to use an example. I always find that it's illustrative. And by the way, as I talk about this, at least in my experience so far, no one's doing this perfect yet. Right? I was asked previously, who can we talk to? Who can we benchmark that's got this down? And my comment was, you never copy off of a C student. And the reason for that is that people are working on it, right? They're still studying, and there's lots of opportunity here, but we are seeing enlightened organizations take the first steps. And so I'll withhold the name to protect the innocent, but I think immediately of a diversified energy client, Fortune 500, large workforce that sits at best estimates right now about 70% FTE, about 30% external workforce. And they've taken great pains over the last couple years to ensure that there was decision support at the point of requirement gathering to inform the organization. And it's resulted in different paths to engage talent. So over the last 2 years, part of that, asking those questions, we do need to hire FTEs, and it shouldn't be the last resort. It's where it makes sense for us. So through an integrated RPO, recruitment process outsourcing component, about 2,000 hires have been brought in using this process. About 5,000 traditional contingents in that same time period using that, as well as a host of service providers where, based on the type of work performed and the accountability, we're tied to either deliverables or milestones, et cetera. So it's being done. It's not perfect. Not every single requirement is going through that kind of decision process, but we're starting to see leading organizations take those first baby steps to really look and say, the workforce of yesterday is not the workforce of today, which is not going to be the workforce of 10 years from today, and we need to take action and start putting proactive measures in place to support that. So we talk about performance analytics, and I'm sure everyone in this room is very familiar with these amongst others. And as I take a look at it, we probably should have cost per hire up there as a first one. But needless to say, talent analytics are not new. They've been around for some time, but they've been very focused on the employee population. And so as we start to talk about contingent workers, what do we really know about them? And is there alignment and is there streamlining between those metrics to support quality decision making? So if you know what your cost per hire is for an internal employee, what's your cost per hire for a contingent or an outsourced worker over the life of that services contract? If you don't know the answers to that, how can you properly model your workforce? So getting to cost per hire, what's the cost of a layoff? What is your training cost? What's your time to productivity? And modeling it across both workforces supports broad workforce mix modeling, where both from a cost, talent, availability, which is important, what's the demand and availability of that skill set, an organization either in aggregate or on a functional or departmental level can do a quality workforce mix model to ask questions, what should we be hiring, what should we be outsourcing, and what should we be engaging a third party to support on our behalf. But without that alignment of requirements, right, we know this for FTE. Do we know this for contingent? And if we don't, there's an immediate opportunity there to better align between the two and drive new value to the organization. So, what's this all build to? Using the term again, enlightened organizations will challenge their internal teams and their external service providers, if they have a managed service provider, to spearhead transformational initiatives. It's not just about processing an administrative flow or maintaining a system. It's about contributing to the organization. They will elevate HR's role as a strategic business partner. This ties right to the theme of this conference. This is really important. Offering new insights in terms of how work will be done in the future gives HR a front seat at the table, knowing that talent is first and foremost on, I think, every CEO's mind. We look at not just cost, but efficiency. What's the efficacy of us engaging individuals? How do we relate to our competitors for resources? How good are we at driving talent quality? And this last one is the ultimate, right? How do we boost customer experience? What's the voice of the customer saying? What's the voice of the employee saying? What's the voice of our suppliers saying? By taking a proactive role here, there's a world of opportunities. By taking no action, there's a host of risks and challenges that present themselves. So, well, I am actually right on time. I wanted to leave 5 minutes for any Q&A that anyone had. Hopefully you found that interesting and informative. What can I share? Maybe I shouldn't have left 5 minutes for Q&A. Yes, Elliot.
So you talked about the big data, which is a big pain now, but you said the future is going to be in predictive analytics.
Yeah.
So from where you sit at Impellam North America, what are the actual categories of predictive analytics that you guys are using or would want to use if they were available?
Yeah. So I'll answer that, but I want to talk about it first just in terms of a buildup. Again, talking about the evolution that we've been on over the last 5 to 10 years, most of the detail that was produced 10 years ago, I would consider just reporting, not analytics, and purely descriptive in nature. How many people have I engaged, from whom, in what areas, over what time? So if we talk about the evolution, that's phase one, and it's important to have that visibility. The next step in that is, why did certain things happen? Well, we engaged 500 associates, but we lost 300 of it. So why did that happen? What's contributing to that? The next phase is the predictive, which is what is likely to happen next, right? And so we look at that on a paradigm. And the reality is we're not at that phase across all of these metrics today, but we're trying to get there. So when we talk about things like retention or attrition, we're looking at, I mentioned this earlier, but survival and hazard functions. What's the likelihood someone will survive their project? What's the likelihood that they'll have risk? We're taking a look at items such as, and this is one that I'm particularly interested in, but we're using techniques from other disciplines and applying it to the contingent worker process. So one example that immediately comes to mind is out of engineering, and it's called the optimal stopping rule. Some of you may remember this from school. It used to be called the marriage problem, but the idea was, if I have 100 individuals to interview to be my spouse, but I can't go backwards, what's the right number to speed date? Because if I can't go backwards, I may get to 100 and realize I missed the best options. And that's certainly true when you think about it on the recruitment process. If I keep interviewing candidates, the first candidates aren't going to be available. So we're able to take that technique based on the availability of the candidate pool and discipline and apply those same mathematical principles to determine an ideal candidate slate. We look at things like time to proficiency instead of just time to hire. What's the ability to get up to a productive target within the role? And of course, we're continuing to do assessment in terms of the individual engagement characteristics to understand how different factors can influence things in terms of responsiveness, engagement, et cetera. What else?
Hello, sorry. Al-Hassan from Gate Group. Do the statistics that you presented on the contingent workforce vary between skilled and unskilled? How does that break down?
Oh, in terms of that 40%, how many of those are in skill categories versus, say, blue collar or commercial roles? You know, I haven't seen that breakout, but just based on anecdotal experience, it's heavily skewed towards the professional ranks. With the one exception of facilities and janitorial type outsourcing. So we all know those arrangements like Sodexo or JCI, et cetera, which are large portions of the outsourced worker population. So outsourced workers, there's representation, but when we get into areas like freelancers, it tends to be heavily concentrated towards the creative and technology focused individuals. But I can't, not off the cuff, give you a exact percentage. Yes? Well.
Hi, Diana from EG Workforce Solutions. Do you see a reality of single system, VMS, HRIS? Do you think that's doable in the next few years or 10
No,
years?
I don't. And that's why I very intentionally chose the words either through integration or through enhanced capability. So when we think about the leading VMSs, we're seeing increasing capability that replicates what an ATS has in terms of talent communities and community clouds. So that capability is being developed, and we will see through R&D and development certain functionalities built within those platforms. But in the next few years, increased integration bridging the gaps between those separate platforms as they stand today. Good. What else? Well, we are officially at time. I thank you very much. And if anyone has any individual questions, I'll be around all day. Thank you.